Hi, I'm Rob Price, and I'm talking to some inspirational leaders of some of the leading AI and Gen AI businesses in the world. Welcome to Futurise.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy Lyons, and I am the co-founder and CEO of Kestrix. Kestrix is a climate tech and prop tech startup, or SME, on a mission to unlock energy retrofits of existing buildings at speed and scale. We are starting to do this by building what we call the Google Maps of heat loss. So we fly thermal drones over entire neighborhoods, eventually cities at a time, and are building the AI capability to analyze the images we capture of buildings, essentially creating 3D heat loss maps and generating retrofit or insulation recommendations for each building that we scan. So you can think of us as retrofits data layer, as the automated energy surveyor, eventually the data layer to power a retrofit revolution. So thank you so much for having me.
Lucy, and there's so many questions already just on that introduction. But before we do that, what got you into doing, hey, I'm going to get some drones and fly above the earth and get some heat maps?
To give a sense of where this all started, my background is working in early stage climate tech startups, mainly in Europe, so most recently in Berlin. And the startup I worked at before Kestrix was a startup looking at carbon accounting and ESG data for all sorts of clients. So we'd have clients from across automotive, IT, financial institutions, retail, CPG, who all wanted to get a sense of their carbon footprint and what to do about it fundamentally. So I think for me, what influenced me wanting to start Kestrix was working with real estate clients at this startup and figuring out that it is just really wickedly complicated to figure out not only what the carbon footprint of a portfolio of buildings is, but what actually to do about it. And while you can give an indication of how to decarbonize a bunch of assets to an extent without going to site, you do eventually need the size of the walls and the windows and so on and so forth, as well as a sense of actually which walls and windows are leaking heat, which is very hard information to get without going to the buildings. So when I met my co-founder, Matt Goodridge, who went to renovate his own home and couldn't figure out for the life of him what to do first, so flew a thermal drone above his house. When I saw the output of the thermography exercise, I thought to myself, wow, this could be really, really useful for those massive portfolio owners of residential and eventually commercial real estate who need to figure out what exactly they need to do to all of their buildings to make them more energy efficient.
And I think that touches on, I was thinking, who's the client? So I can imagine local authorities being interested, government being interested, but as you say, organisations with large infrastructure responsibilities, commercial or otherwise, who have an obligation to measure and reduce their impact. So who is your client? Who are you appealing to in the work that you're doing?
So the vision really is to become the Google Maps of heat loss, the data layer powering the built environment's climate transition. So you can almost think of in the future, Kestrix's customer being anyone who uses EPC data today. So this could be anyone from installers looking for new opportunities to mortgage providers trying to understand the footprint of their loan book, to real estate agents, making transactions on homes. However, you have to start somewhere, have to walk before you run. So today, Kestrix works exclusively with UK social housing providers. So that's about 20% of the housing stock in the UK. And these, 1,600 organizations that own and operate these homes are under a ton of pressure to retrofit from the government, from residents, from financiers. However, the status quo of energy performance data, so the EPC system, just doesn't tell you really what you need to do to homes to make them more efficient. It gives you a sense of maybe how much they cost to run, but they require better data. So we're starting by helping them. We're doing sort of estates at a time. The way that social housing is laid out is also quite conducive to our early approach, because we can send the drones to one area, do 500, 600 homes at a time, come back with the data, get feedback, and iterate. So that's where we're starting.
Cool, excellent. So I'd like to talk a bit about generally the area around responsibility ethics, but also touch on compliance. And I think in the conversation that we've had so far, there are two angles to that. I mean, the podcast itself, we talk to chief execs of organizations who are doing AI and generative AI, and there's a whole host of things associated with that. And I'll come to that second. But you're also flying drones. And so my mate's got a drone, and I've seen kind of every time he kind of sticks it up in the village, he gets a horde of people complaining about it. So how have you kind of looked at the authorization, given that the regulations are increasing in that space, around collecting the data? But then I'd also like to talk about how we're then using AI within it.
Absolutely. So to reiterate, that's correct. We are doing high resolution scanning with thermal and visible spectrum drones of residential areas. So naturally, in doing so, we pick up a lot of data and a lot of human activity. So our main challenge, and the thing that we're very conscious of, is how do we effectively depersonalize and therefore minimize the amount of personal data that we actually collect. So we have, the first step we took was ensuring that everything we're doing is totally legal, which we've done. But of course, it's about more than that. It's about making sure that people are comfortable. So in order to, be best in class around data privacy, we've actually just been admitted to a program run by the Information Commissioner's Office called the ICO Sandbox. Basically, the ICO will work with Kestrix to ensure that the way that we capture data and the way that we manage data is, minimizing this sort of capture of personal data. They will work with us very closely to develop best practices. So we're quite excited about this. It was actually announced yesterday. So very, very topical. The last thing I'll say is we are definitely slipstreaming behind a huge sort of revolution in drones and in that drone surveillance. Kestrix is certainly not the only company that will be using drones to collect lots of data on all sorts of things in the built environment, in nature. So it is, the responsibility of tech companies collectively, I think, as well as regulators who keep them in check, to make sure that this is being done uber responsibly.
Cool. And if we touch on the AI side briefly, because I guess there's also a transparency kind of key part here, because if you're creating a heat map for a building and then that owner of that building, in commercial or otherwise, raises an issue, then the transparency by which the algorithms are applied to that data to reach the conclusion for that building heat map, there's an audit trail that's going to be important there. Is that something else that's been key part of the conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we it's always a balance of how do you use AI to uncover as much as you can about what you're trying to figure out, which in our case is the fabric performance of buildings, not anything about anyone. But also, as you go on that journey to basically figuring out all of the things that you need to, what data are you coming up against, and how can you use that in a way that's ethical? So, for example, we work with social housing, and one of the kind of key concerns of our clients is how do how do we ensure that we are focusing on the homes not only that need retrofit because the building fabric is failing, but also that need retrofit because that particular resident is at particular risk of fuel poverty. So there is a bit of socioeconomic profiling that you have to start to do. However, we are really conscious that we have to strike a balance between not only what is right for the building, but what's right for the residents. So how do we collect the right information without being excessively invasive? Again, we always see there's a difference between what is allowed from a regulatory perspective and also what makes people comfortable, because there may be things that are allowed that still make people feel uneasy. So I think key for us is also just maintaining a line of communication with the residents. So I'm not sure how long we're going to be able to do this, because we endeavor to scan tens of thousands of buildings in the next few years. But at the moment, when we've scanned 1,500 to date, and every resident has received a letter and the ability to actually contact me personally to discuss things. So we have had conversations with residents about privacy, and we really take the approach of wanting to get their feedback actually on our process.
Which is fantastic, and applaud. I mean, the personal commitment in that sense to speak to anyone with any concerns at that stage of launching and gaining the credibility and trust. I mean, it's going to be about trust in terms of people doing that. But you touched there on growth and the way forward, and I'm interested to look at that in two parts. One of which is how you build the team around you, because that team. The area that we're talking about in this conversation, I can imagine is going to appeal to many people, a desire to be involved. But you're going to need reach as well, aren't you? Because I mean, to go back to your ambition, which we'll come to shortly, in terms of the Google Maps of Google heat maps of buildings, then that's far more than the UK potentially. So how have you built the culture, and how do you attract people on your journey? Not just so far, but over the next kind of 2 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think the company and the mission sort of works for itself here. I think what's really special about Kestrix is two things. We're working on a really important problem. I think people more and more want to dedicate their careers and therefore their lives to something meaningful. So you see a huge influx of people interested in working in climate tech, taking skills that they've built at another tech company, perhaps, whether it's technical skills or sales or business development, and wanting to apply it to a mission that they care about. So we ride that sort of climate tech impact wave, which I think attracts a lot of talent. But I think what makes us unique, in that broader climate space is actually the deep tech software element that we bring. We're trying to solve a really interesting machine learning and computer vision problem. We're the first company, to our knowledge, to automate 3D reconstruction of thermal images. We're building out the first algorithm that estimates heat loss without an interior temperature reading, which is a very interesting sort of radiation physics and machine learning problem. So we seem to, and this is, I think, the team we've been able to build until now is a testament to this. We seem to attract engineers who are purpose driven, but also at the end of the day, great engineers want to work on hard problems, and we offer the opportunity to do that. So I think it's about sort of being very clear about that. We're not just hiring engineers to build something. We are, giving engineers the opportunity to be creative and really use their skills, which not every organization can offer that.
No, but there's a common theme there in terms of novel application of the technologies to do things that kind of create a big impact on people's society's planet, which is the theme through many of the conversations I've had on this podcast. So that's great to hear. Let's kind of move to that ambition then. So how do you think about, I mean, you started at the start of the conversation by saying, hey, I've got this kind of great big goal of what I want to be. Do you think about it in a set of transition states? Is it how do you get from where you are today to, I won't say world domination, but you get my point.
Yeah, so there's sort of, you can think about it in two phases. So the end state, as I've said, is the Google Maps of heat loss. We want to have data on every building in Europe and North America, if not every building in the world eventually. We want there to be no need anymore to go to a home to assess heat loss. We want there to be data available to build the business cases for retrofit at the scale that is required. You know, coming out of the most recent COP in Dubai, there's a commitment to triple renewables, but on top of that, there's a commitment to double the rate of retrofit from 2% to 4%. It is just a massive infrastructure challenge. And if you don't have a data layer for an infrastructure challenge like that, it doesn't get planned, doesn't get financed, and it doesn't get verified, which means the work maybe isn't done right. So that's really the vision. There's sort of two phases, though, that we need to sort of cross to get there. I think at the moment, we are operating on sort of a turnkey model. So rather than actually mapping everything up front, we get a list of addresses, we go and do those addresses, we deliver that data to the client. The shift that we want to see happen over the next 3 years is going from getting data from the client on where we're supposed to go to actually going there first, and then turning back around and distributing the data to all the stakeholders that potentially need it in that area. So to sort of jump, kind of cross this bridge, I wouldn't say jump off this bridge. We're aiming to map our first small city at the end of this year. So basically, this would be an area of a couple of thousand homes, whereby we perform the scans up front and basically prove out the model that actually there's loads of different use cases for this data. So we would approach, sort of all the folks that I mentioned at the beginning, who, maybe have a need for an alternative to EPCs that's more actionable, and really just test the proposition. And it's with this that we'll go out to hopefully raise a larger funding round to support what we're doing and really scale this to multiple cities and hopefully nationwide within a short time.
Lucy, that could probably go on for hours with more questions around it, and so many links to so many conversations I've had over the past few years. But thank you. It's been fascinating talking to you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me, Rob. Really appreciate it.